Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajah. Brothers, sisters, respected viewers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And thank you for joining us once again in our series, Life, the Islamic Answer. You will remember that we were discussing the general theme of knowledge and reason and rationality in Islam. And after having discussed the importance of knowledge in Islam, the importance of ensuring that any knowledge seeking is accompanied with sincerity and action, we discussed what it means to be a learner in Islam. We discussed what it means to be a scholar in Islam. And we started discussing the idea of a community of knowledge in Islam. So first, we established the importance of understanding that our religion gives a lot of importance to the notion of community in general. That in the afterlife, the Holy Quran tells us that as human beings, we are not only going to be accountable and responsible as an individual, but that we are part of a community and we have a responsibility and a role to play as a community together. Once we established this, we moved to the specific notion of a community of knowledge, in the sense that within the greater community of Islam, within the greater community of the lovers of Ahlul Bayt, the followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, there can be smaller communities. And there are different ways to belong to these communities. One of these communities is a community of knowledge. And so we are trying now to understand what it means to have a community of knowledge, to become a community of knowledge, to build a community of knowledge, and to belong to a community of knowledge. And so we said the first question we have is, who belongs to a community of knowledge? A part of the answer should have become clear. We discussed the learner in Islam, and we discussed the teacher and the scholar in Islam. So clearly those two categories are going to belong to the community of knowledge. Who else? And so when we went through the different ahadith, we see that in our religion, in short, the answer is that everyone is supposed to belong to the community of knowledge. The relationship to knowledge can be very different. The person who is formally seeking knowledge, the person who is the formal learner, they definitely belong to the community of knowledge in a certain way. The person who imparts, who teaches that knowledge, who is an expert in that knowledge, belongs to that community of knowledge in another way. What about the rest? And this is where we saw that there are narrations, there are teachings in Islam that say, for instance, if you are not the scholar or the teacher, then at least be the learner. And if you cannot be the learner, then at least be someone who listens to them, someone who sits in their gatherings, or at least, the Holy Prophet says, or at least be someone who loves them and loves those gatherings of knowledge. That love of the gatherings of knowledge is the way to belong to that community. That's at a minimum, which means that everyone belongs to that community. The role you're playing is different. If you are a lover of the community of knowledge, this needs to show in your actions. Anyone who sees how you act will say this is someone who loves the community of knowledge, who loves Islamic knowledge, who contributes to it in some way. It may not be by learning, and it may not be by teaching. It may not even be by attending. But you are still contributing one way or another to these communities of knowledge. But we said in the hadith, there's a clear progression. This is at a minimum. If you cannot be, the Holy Prophet says, if you cannot be the scholar and the teacher. So by default, the Holy Prophet expects everyone to become an expert in this religion. He says, but if you cannot, then become the learner. If you cannot, then at least sit in their gatherings. And if you cannot, then at least be a lover of those gatherings. And this means that don't be the opposite. Don't be an obstacle, don't be an impediment, don't be a barrier to these types of gatherings and this type of building a community of knowledge. So inshallah, this part is clear. In short, we said when we discussed the notion of who belongs to the community of knowledge, the short answer is everyone must belong to it. The role you play may be different, but you have to feel, you have to understand that you belong to a community of knowledge. If you're a follower of Ahlul Bayt, you're a follower of this religion, knowledge is that important in our religion. That's first. And we said there's a couple of other discussions that we want to have, but because they're secondary, we're going to keep them until the end of the discussion on the community of knowledge. Specifically, we want to talk about a few categories that are usually not addressed directly when we talk about a community of knowledge, to see what is the role that our religion gives to these communities. The next discussion we had to do with the person that the community chooses as its source of knowledge, the expert in religion, the expert in the knowledge related to religion. Who is that person? What are their characteristics? So we went through a long series of characteristics, and we saw that our religion did not leave this to randomness. We have characteristics that touch the spiritual side. We have characteristics that touch the psychological side, the competence of the person, their ability to explain things, their ability to understand people, to adapt, tailor, customize the message depending on the audience, and so on and so forth. We saw all of that in the teachings and in the ahadith. This brought us to the discussion of how do we build the community of knowledge. And we started to talk about this, and inshallah today we're going to continue with this. The main way, there are other ways, but the main way our religion says to build the community of knowledge is through gatherings. And gatherings that are in person. And this is a point that we have to make even more than before. In the past, when our scholars would talk about the importance of gatherings or attending in person, this was as opposed to learning your religion only from books. And they would say if someone only learned their religion from books, it is dangerous. That's why they always ask you, but who is your sheikh? Who is your teacher in this topic, in this subject? When you read the book, did you consult someone who's an expert so that your understanding of that subject matter is actually accurate? Or did you go in a completely different way? And so that in general has always been the case. In today's world, it's even more the case because there is a way to learn this religion without ever leaving your home. You can rely entirely on your phone and a monitor, you can watch TV, you can see it on YouTube, you can follow on the internet. As a last resort, if there is no other way for you to access this knowledge, then of course choose that over not accessing the knowledge. But if you have the choice between the in-person and not in-person, virtual for instance, or going back to only relying on books, always choose in-person. You can complement it. You can add to it, supplement it with the rest, but the in-person has to be a staple, as they say, has to be always there, without risk. Inshallah, that part is also clear, so I won't spend too much time on it. And today we're going to continue with this idea of the gatherings of knowledge. We discussed very quickly the importance of ensuring that, therefore, our community centers, our Husayniyat, our mosques, our religious centers, play a specific role related to all of this. The gatherings that take place in the past, in a lot of cases, and we saw this in multiple ahadith, it was not possible for people, especially the lovers of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, it was not always easy or possible for them to gather together publicly and to discuss openly religion and to discuss openly the teachings of Ahlul Bayt. This meant that they are becoming directly under threat for their lives, for being harassed. Today the situation is different, which means that we have to take advantage of this. In the past it was at least in your homes, as we found in the ahadith. At least in your homes gather. Make sure that these gatherings in person continue. One way or another, keep gathering. Today the majority of the gatherings are taking place in community centers, in the mosques, and even in the homes. And all of that is desirable. But it means that therefore there's an additional layer, additional responsibility when we have these centers to add that planning and that organization, the strategic thinking, as they say. If our religion is so accurate about the types of knowledge, inshallah, as we will see. We haven't discussed the types of knowledge our religion urges us to learn. Our religion has been very clear on the importance of seeking knowledge, on the importance of choosing the sources of knowledge, on the frequency, as we saw. In the hadith, we saw that at least at a minimum, the hadith from the Holy Prophet and others was saying, misery to the man, woe to the man. Will he not even spend one day of his week or a part of one day of his week to learn knowledge? So this has to become the minimum for these types of gatherings. And what we added to this discussion is that let's make sure that it becomes a gathering of knowledge. We can do a lot of things when we gather. We can perform acts of worship. We can remind each other. We can remember things. All good. But there has to be a component of knowledge in the gathering so that it falls in this category. And so this, you have to go out of your way to organize it, to plan it, to make sure that it is happening. Create an environment where knowledge is happening. Knowledge seeking, knowledge sharing, learning is taking place. Don't leave it completely up to chance and randomness. Just because people are gathering under some religious heading, then that's okay and that's enough. No, you're still not meeting the minimal threshold. The gathering has to be a gathering of knowledge and add the rest to it. And inshallah, all of that is also clear. As we said, we discussed the frequency. We discussed the importance that, so as part of these gatherings of knowledge, the importance that it's not just one way. And we've talked about this a few times. It's not only one way, because the ahadith say, first, you have to meet, and you have to meet therefore in person, visit each other, meet, and it says discuss, and ask each other questions, and answer each other's questions, which means that this is two-way. I remind you, and you remind me. I ask you, and you ask me. There's a discussion that is taking place. This forces you to learn. Sometimes you think you know, but because you haven't been forced to actually say it with your own words, when the time comes that you have to say it with your own words, you don't find the right words. It might seem easy. The argument, when you hear the argument, let's say for the existence of God, or the need for religion, or that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is just, or that we need prophets, it may seem that it's a very simple argument. Can you repeat the arguments in your own words? For yourself, if you are convinced, would you be able to explain it? Explain it to your friend, to your child, to your neighbor, to your co-worker, if the discussion happens. If not, it means that you're not having those discussions. You have to put yourself in a situation where this is being discussed. And this was very clear in the ahadith. We started to see in some of the ahadith, in addition, that these gatherings are going to bring spiritual benefits. And we saw a little bit of that, and inshallah today we're going to continue with that. One hadith we spent a little bit more time on was very interesting because it brought something that perhaps never comes to our minds. Why do we have to get together and gather around knowledge? Unless I'm mistaken, the hadith was from Imam Ali alayhi salam. He was saying out of duty to the knowledge. If you do not do this, he doesn't mention in that hadith that you benefit or not. He just says you have to. There's a duty to get together, because if you do not, the knowledge will disappear. The duty is towards knowledge. But this is not any normal knowledge. And as we said, this is exactly what happened. If we have the situation that we have today in today's world, where so much of our religion is unknown, so much of our religion is a question of back and forth and finding the evidence for it, and we're not sure. Why? Because the knowledge disappeared. And now we have to go through very, very significant efforts to try to re-find that knowledge, rediscover the knowledge, the little bit of it that was left in the books. That's because not enough of it stayed alive in the communities. And we're not saying it was possible to keep it alive. The conditions were very difficult. But still the outcome is the same. The knowledge disappears, Imam Ali alayhi salam says. The way to keep the knowledge alive, to keep the knowledge in the community, is by gathering and discussing that knowledge. So you have a duty towards, whether you think about it as a duty towards knowledge, a duty towards next generations, you have a duty, you have a role to play. And we discussed, and I believe we ended with this, I think, the last thing we discussed was the hadith, and we saw a few other ahadith to support it, that interestingly went from discussing knowledge to the Imam saying, and this is how you keep our affair, our cause alive. This is how you perform our ihya'u amrina. And we said this is a very big topic in the narrations of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. We all may have a way, we may have an idea what we think is the way to keep the cause of Ahlul Bayt alive. In those ahadith, the Imam say, gather together and discuss knowledge. This is how you keep our cause alive. This is very significant. For people who are lovers of Ahlul Bayt, followers of Ahlul Bayt, this may not be what comes to our minds first when we think about Ihya Amr Ahlul Bayt. We think of a lot of other things that are important, but they are different from knowledge. Okay, so we ended with this. Inshallah, today we continue. So more of the benefits of these gatherings. So as we said, some of these benefits, so that I don't keep repeating them, some of these benefits can be spiritual. Some of these benefits can be psychological, social, and some of these benefits can be worldly. Because you build a community, and now you know people that you can rely on, and who can rely on you. And this is building a community beyond. These are worldly reasons for building that community. The first hadith from Imam Ali alayhi السلام عن أمير المؤمنين عليه السلام يقول دعاني رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله فخلوت معه في بيته فقال لي يا علي أنت مني بمنزلة هارون من موسى غير أنه لا نبي بعدي إني أوصيك اليوم بوصية إن أنت حفظتها عشت حميدا ومت شهيدا وبعثك الله يوم القيامة فقيها عالما. So we'll explain this part, and I want to say something about this hadith, and we continue. So Imam Ali alayhi salam says, the messenger of God sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi summoned me, called me, invited me. So I met with him alone in his room. So he said to me, O Ali, you are to me in the same rank as Harun was to Musa alayhi salam. But there is no prophet after me. On this day, I will give you advice that if you learn it, you will live a praised life. You will die the death of those who are witnesses or shaheed, and we discussed this notion of shahada in the Quran. And God will raise you on the day of judgment as a true scholar, as a faqih. The Holy Prophet says, faqihan alima, if you follow this piece of advice. Now, there's a scholar by the name of al-Nasfi, Amr bin Muhammad al-Nasfi, or Umar bin Muhammad al-Nasfi. He lived in the 500s Hijri, about 900 years ago. He wrote a book that is called Wasiyatun Nabi ila Ali alayhim as-salam. He's known to be a Sunni scholar, but that book is very interesting. So this is the beginning of that book. And then you have the lines of the wasiyah. And if I remember, there are 219 wasaya, pieces of advice that the Holy Prophet gives to Imam Ali alayhi salam. The one that we're interested in is number 82, We're skipping all the ones before and all the ones after, but just so that you have the context. Where is this coming from? Okay, so all of that said, this is the part now that we are talking about. So Imam Ali alayhi salam says, the Holy Prophet told me, Ya Ali, إذا أتى على المؤمن 40 صباحا ولم يجالس العلماء قسى قلبه وجسر على الكبائر لأن العلم حياة القلب ولا عبادة إلا بالعلم ولا ينفع العلم إلا مع العمل. The main line, I want to focus on it. The rest supplements it. And we've discussed all of this in the past. So the Holy Prophet, Imam Ali alayhi salam says, the Holy Prophet told him, O Ali, if 40 days pass and the believer has not been in the presence of scholars, his heart hardens. It becomes hard. And he will be more daring to commit the great sins, not even normal sins. He will be more daring to commit the great sins. And then he adds, that is because knowledge is the life of the heart. Knowledge is the life of the heart. This is the main line. And the Holy Prophet says, the way to keep that going is through what? Is through attending in person, the gatherings. Knowledge is the life of the heart. And then he adds, and there is no worship without knowledge. That's one. And two, and knowledge is useless without action. You have to act. And acting without knowledge is useless. So this is what keeps your heart alive. And how do you keep it alive? Where does this knowledge come from? He says your minimum is 40 days. 40 days means that you are now going to become daring to perform cardinal sins, great sins. You're on the verge. So this requires a little bit of an explanation. The first point, the beginning of the hadith. The Holy Prophet ﷺ is talking to Imam Ali alayhi salam, and he tells him, you are to me like Harun was to Prophet Musa alayhi salam. This is a narration that we should all know. We've heard it multiple times. We refer to it as Hadith al-Manzila. The point I want to make very quickly about this, because it's not about this discussion. Sometimes we think that these ahadith, these narrations, the Holy Prophet said it once. And it was recorded that once, and we moved on. Example, Hadith al-Manzila. Hadith al-Manzila, the rank of Imam Ali to the Holy Prophet, his relationship to the Holy Prophet, being of the same type of relationship as Prophet Harun was to Prophet Musa, Hadith al-Manzila, this was repeated many times by the Holy Prophet throughout the years. But we don't have accurate numbers for it. You'd have to dig through the books and to look at every instance we can find where the Holy Prophet used that wording. This is one of them. And in this case, this was not public. Imam Ali alayhi salam says, he called me and I met with him alone in his room. So no one else knows this. We have other instances where the Prophet said this openly and publicly, and everyone heard when the Prophet told him, you are to me as Harun was to Musa. Okay, that's point one. Similar to this, because that one we do have examples of how many times it was repeated. For instance, the verses related to التطهير, the purification verse, or Hadith al-Thaqalain. We have numbers around those, just to see how much the Prophet went out of his way to establish this relationship between him and certain people, so that this does never become an issue of contention, an issue to be questioned afterwards. For instance, one of the companions says, I went to visit the Holy Prophet and I remained in Medina for 6 months. During those 6 months, this is the companion, he's an outsider. He just wants to meet the Prophet, spend time with them. He says every day on the prayer, the Fajr prayer in the morning, the Holy Prophet would walk to the house of Ali and Fatima and knock on the door and recite these verses, he would say, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, peace be upon you, he says to the inhabitants of this house. And then he would repeat the verse, إنما يريد الله ليذهب عنكم الرجس أهل البيت ويطهركم تطهيرا. 33. Al-Ahzab 33. And then he would say, As-salah, as-salah, yarhamkumullah. Get up for prayer. It's time for Fajr prayer. It's not that these people are not going to get up for prayer. The Holy Prophet is establishing the relationship. Who are these people? They are the people that this verse is talking about. They are the people that are meant by the verse 33. They are the ones that God has purified. That's the point, right? How long did he do this for? 6 months, every single day. That's why we say it's difficult for us now to even have a discussion with someone who wants to just easily say, yeah, but there's other people who are included in this verse. It's everyone. Anyone who from far or close belongs to the family of the Prophet, they're all purified. The Holy Prophet never did this with anyone. He only did this with one specific group of people, 4 other people. Fatima, Ali, and their 2 sons. That's it. Those are the people that he's knocking the door of every single day and repeating this. More than that, Ibn Abbas, and we've spoken about Ibn Abbas that all Muslims respect as a matter of consensus, trustworthy, huge scholar, companion of the Prophet. He says the Holy Prophet performed this action. This is more accurate. This is not a foreign visitor to Medina. He lived in the house of the Holy Prophet, Ibn Abbas. He says the Holy Prophet, we saw, he says, we witnessed or we saw. The Holy Prophet performed this 5 times a day for 9 months. Because Ibn Abbas was there. 9 months, 5 times a day. Every time the Holy Prophet goes to pray, you do the math. This is how many times the Holy Prophet has said, these are the people who are meant by this verse. Does this leave any room for question? No. And this is so that enough people see it, so that it closes the door on that discussion. When we say there are people that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has purified, who are they? The Holy Prophet is answering 5 times a day, 9 months in a row. Okay, so that's a side discussion, but because the hadith mentioned that, the hadith al-manzila, so I'm mentioning that. Second point. The second point related to this hadith, I think, is that we have to appreciate, we have to feel that we're very lucky to have this hadith. And there are a lot of hadith like this one. When Imam Ali alayhi salam says, the Holy Prophet invited me, summoned me, and I met with him alone in his room, and he told me this means that this should have never reached us. This is only between the Holy Prophet ﷺ and Imam Ali alayhi salam. We're not going to claim that we understand the same thing from the words of the Prophet as Imam Ali's understanding. But just to have access to these words is something very special. We have to pay attention to this. We can't just look at these words as though they're the words of anyone to anyone. These are very special words, and the Holy Prophet made it clear. He said, you are going to live a praiseworthy life. And you're going to die the death of those who are the true witnesses. And on the day of judgment, you're going to be resurrected as the people who have true knowledge before God. And this is one of the pieces of advice that he gives around it. So this cannot be taken lightly. We have to appreciate the type of knowledge, the quality of the knowledge that we're receiving here. We have to look into it more. The third point. The third point has to do with the content of the hadith. So the Holy Prophet is saying, if you stay away from the gatherings of knowledge, from the people of knowledge for 40 days, the consequence is that your heart hardens. So I want to spend a bit more time on this idea. It seems to be a metaphor. The heart is becoming hard. And then the Prophet says, and you will be much more daring to commit the greater sins, the cardinal sins. Okay, so we'll come back to the relationship between the two. That you do not attend and you perform sins. Let's take this idea of the heart becoming hard. The Holy Quran talks about this multiple times. And so we can't just take this as a metaphor, just something the Holy Prophet is using, a linguistic device the Holy Prophet is using, an image. That part is clear. Everyone understands something from this. But when we look at what the Holy Quran says about the heart becoming hard, we see that there's a lot more depth to this than what seems to be the case. It's not simply that, you become desensitized. Yes, you do become desensitized. That's the bottom line. But what else? In one verse in Surah Al-Baqarah, again, Arabic and then English, 2 verse 74. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was talking to a group of Jewish people. And then he says after that, he says, ثُمَّ قَسَتْ قُلُوبُكُم مِّن بَعْدِ ذَلِكَ فَهِيَ كَالْحِجَارَةِ أَوْ أَشَدُّ قَسْوَةً وَإِنَّ مِنَ الْحِجَارَةِ لَمَا يَتَفَجَّرُ مِنْهُ الْأَنْهَارُ وَإِنَّ مِنْهَا لَمَا يَشَّقَّقُ فَيَخْرُجُ مِنْهُ الْمَاءُ وَإِنَّ مِنْهَا لَمَا يَهْبِطُ مِنْ خَشْيَةِ اللَّهِ وَمَا اللَّهُ بِغَافِلٍ عَمَّا تَعْمَلُونَ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this verse 274, he says, then your hearts hardened, becoming as rock or even harder. Why even harder? What can be harder than rock? So the Quran is going to explain how your hearts are even harder than rock. He says, for even among rocks, there are indeed some from which streams gush forth. There are rocks, you see them, and from them there's water coming out. So the water is gushing forth in those. That's the first category. The Quran continues, and indeed, some rocks from which waters flow when they split open. With time, there are rocks that split open, and then the water goes through. It takes time. It's not like the first, where the water is just gushing forth. This is the water is running through, but it is still running through it. Something is still happening to the rock. The third instance, and after this, and indeed others which fall down in awe and fear of God. The Quran says there are rocks that fall down out of fear of God. And God is surely not unaware of what you do. God knows what you do. Here, the Holy Quran just made it very clear. Why is it using this metaphor? The Quran is basically saying you are receiving the truth. You are exposed to the truth. You know the truth. Your heart is exposed to something. There's some sort of consequence. There's some sort of effect that should show. Nothing. Is this not harder than a rock? Even with the case of rocks, there's an effect that happens. With your hearts, nothing is happening. So it's even worse than rocks. You're harder than stone. Correct? This is very clear from the verse. And here, of course, scholars have added commentary. For instance, they have said that these are not just some random 3 different metaphors that the Quran just used. It's specific. For instance, some have said that the streams that gush forth, it's probably having to do with your feelings towards truth and justice and injustice. Something that moves you towards others, that you act in the world when you see injustice happening. Because that's usually something that speaks to all human beings. In the second case, they say it perhaps has to do with knowledge and wisdom, when the water is now flowing, as the rock splits. And the third one has to do with being pious, being religious, your religiousness, fear of God. In any case. So the question is, in this case, do we think that the Quran is just using this as a metaphor? Or is there more? Right? Especially if we keep in mind that the Quran uses this again and again. It wouldn't be random that the Quran is using the same metaphor more than once. In another verse, the Quran says, so this is 59:21, Surah Al-Hashr. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and you all know this verse. لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل لرأيته خاشعا متصدعا من خشية الله وتلك الأمثال نضربها. So the Quran says, had we made this Quran descend upon a mountain, then you would have seen it humbling itself, crumbling and cleaving out of fear of God. These are the parables that we set forth for humankind so that they may perhaps reflect. Here the Quran says it's a parable. Parable means it's an example we give you, a story we give you. It's not necessarily to be taken literally. But the way the Quran just talked about it, combine it with the verse before. The Quran is saying, had we brought this Quran down upon a mountain, we didn't bring it down upon a mountain. The Quran was not revealed to the mountain. The Quran was revealed to human beings. So what is the effect of human beings? That's what the Quran is comparing. What is the effect that the Quran is having on human beings who have been given everything they need to understand this Quran? There should be an effect. If you were a mountain, the Quran says, if you were the hardest part of nature, and you would have received this Quran, this is what would have happened. You would have crumbled in fear of God. First, you would have had fear, and then you would have crumbled. First, khashi'an, mutasaddi'an. You break up, you cleave, you go into pieces out of fear of God. But you're not even like a mountain. You're harder. Your hearts are even harder than the stone of the mountain. So nothing happens. That's what the Quran is saying. Okay, that's a second metaphor. Third, same again, metaphor. Surah Az-Zumar. Now we're going to see another few details added to this metaphor. Surah Az-Zumar is 39, this is verse 22. أَفَمَنْ شَرَحَ اللَّهُ صَدْرَهُ لِلْإِسْلَامِ فَهُوَ عَلَى نُورٍ مِّن رَبِّهِ فَوَيْلٌ لِلْقَاسِيَةِ قُلُوبُهُم مِّن ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ أُولَٰئِكَ فِي ضَلَالٍ مُبِينٍ. Is the one whose heart God has expanded to submission. So he is upon light or upon enlightenment from his God. So misery or woe unto those whose hearts have hardened to the remembrance of God. It is they who are in clear misguidance. The previous verse, because I don't want to spend too much time on it, the previous verse was also a metaphor. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was talking about how He brings down the rain. Have you not seen how your Lord brings down the rain? The rain becomes streams from which plants grow, then it withers and dies. So it was talking about two things in the previous verse. The first one is that this is a metaphor for the resurrection. You see a land that is completely barren, then the rain that falls down, and then it comes to life. And then the season progresses, goes through, and then it all withers and dies again, as though there was never any life in the first place. And then this happens again and again. And the Quran says, this is one of the signs of your God, of your Lord in this world, so that you remember that this is going to happen to you too. Same thing is happening to you. You are withering away and you will die, and then you will be brought back to be judged. The same idea. That's one part of the metaphor. The other part of the metaphor is that the land is barren, and some lands that are barren will never bear any fruit. And some are going to bear fruit. Some lands are good, and some lands are not. Two metaphors with the same idea, from the same idea. Then the next verse is this one. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, so woe be to those whose hearts have hardened to the remembrance of God. Okay, so that's one association. The second point related to this verse. This is a topic that inshallah in the future we can talk about a little bit more, but it has to do with this idea of the expansion of the heart, if we want to translate it literally. In this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَفَمَنْ شَرَحَ اللَّهُ صَدْرَهُ. In this case, شَرَحَ. أَلَمْ نَشْرَحْ لَكَ صَدْرَكَ. It's mentioned again and again in the Quran. This expansion of the chest, expansion of the heart, narrowness of the heart. It's mentioned in other verses. There are people who have a narrow heart or a narrow chest, the Quran says. What is this talking about? So this inshallah one day we'll talk about a little bit more. But very quickly, it's as though you need a lot of openness to be able to accept the truth. This is not something easy to accept. Because sometimes the truth goes against your interests. Sometimes the truth goes against your desires. Do you accept it or not? Is your heart wide enough to accept the truth or not? Has God helped you in that way or not? And so you see the verses, they talk about the one whose heart or whose chest God has expanded or opened up. This is what it means. He's helped you in that way. And this opens another discussion. So what credit do I get? What merit do I get if God has opened my chest and not opened yours, or the opposite? It's God who's doing all of this. And the short answer, we're going to get it in another verse, by the way. But in short, it's your actions. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put principles and causes in place. If someone has a wider, a more open heart to the truth, a more open mind to the truth, it's because of how they conduct themselves, how they work on themselves, and the opposite. The person whose heart is not opened up, not expanded, it's also because of what they do. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not forcing you to have an open heart or a closed heart, to use the same metaphor. To be more open or more closed off to the truth. This is your own actions. But this causality is put in place by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a constant reminder that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who has put all of this in place. There's a very interesting reference in this verse. This is not the time for it, but the verse says, it compares the one whose heart God has expanded, so he is upon a light from his Lord. That's very interesting. Especially if you link it to other verses of the Quran that talk about the one whose heart is open versus the one whose heart becomes narrow. As though he is being elevated into the heavens. يَصَّعَّدُ فِي السَّمَاءِ. There's a very interesting discussion that can be had related to pressure, atmospheric pressure, and what happens when you go up and down. If you go up a number of kilometers, it becomes almost impossible for you to breathe. Or if you go down into the oceans and that pressure becomes too high, the human being dies. That's why they have to build and design these very special submarines. These verses of the Quran, they're talking about something that requires more study. There's a number of them, this is not our topic. But a number of these verses talk about the chest or the heart being open or becoming narrow, as though someone is traveling into the heavens. What would that have meant 14 centuries ago? Today it's very easy. We can say exactly what it means. To us, from a scientific point of view. For them, we're not sure what that means. Okay? So in this verse, there's also something very interesting, because it says, is the person whose heart or whose chest Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has expanded, so it is as though he is upon a light from his Lord. That might become an interesting discussion to have. What does it mean to be upon a light? فَهُوَ عَلَى نُورٍ مِّن رَبِّهِ. Literally, this is what it means. To be on a light from his Lord. That requires a discussion. We'll leave it to another time. And then we also have This is verse 39, 22, Surah Al-Zumar 22. This person that the Quran is describing as the one whose heart, whose chest Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has expanded. We have narrations that say this is a clear and direct reference to Imam Ali alayhi salam. This is the perfect example of this verse, in any case. Two more verses quickly, related to the same topic. They give us another angle. First one in Surah Al-Ma'idah, 5:13. فَبِمَا نَقْضِهِمْ مِيثَاقَهُمْ لَعَنَّاهُمْ وَجَعَلْنَا قُلُوبَهُمْ قَاسِيَةً. So as a result of their breaking the covenant, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was explaining His teachings to previous nations, telling them that this is my deal with you, this is my covenant with you. Then the next verse says, so as a result of their breaking of their covenant, we cursed them and we made their hearts hard. And this is the answer to the previous question we had. The previous question was, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does this randomly? No. The Quran says, when they broke the covenant, the result was that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made their hearts hard. It's your actions. Direct consequence. So that's one. The second one, Surah Al-Hajj 22:53. Surah Al-Hajj, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لِيَجْعَلَ مَا يُلْقِي الشَّيْطَانُ فِتْنَةً لِلَّذِينَ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ مَرَضٍ وَالْقَاسِيَةِ قُلُوبُهُمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, so that He makes that which Satan inspires, throws, casts, spews, a temptation only for those whose hearts contain a sickness and those whose hearts are hard. And truly, the wrongdoers are totally engrossed in oppression. So, maybe this is a complex structure in English. The Quran is saying, Satan is going to inspire, Satan is going to whisper, the devil is going to try to inspire you with something. Does it work or not? This verse tells us one of the ways in which we know if it's going to affect you or not. The devil will do his work. Will it affect you? The Quran says it will affect those in whom there is sickness in their hearts or their hearts have hardened. So this becomes a criteria for all of us. To the extent that your heart holds a sickness or has become hard, then you are going to be open to the temptations of Satan, to the inspiration of Satan. لِيَجْعَلَ مَا يُلْقِي الشَّيْطَانُ فِتْنَةً. It becomes a fitnah, it becomes a temptation for whom? لِلَّذِينَ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ مَرَضٌ وَالْقَاسِيَةِ قُلُوبُهُمْ. So that becomes a clear criteria. So when we take all of these verses together, we looked, I think, at 5 verses. There's a very logical progression. There's something happening. First, the Quran said, you keep committing sins. As you commit sins, you break the covenant of God. When you knowingly break the covenant of God, the heart starts to harden. When the heart becomes hard, you're no longer fearful of God. You're no longer afraid to commit the sin. And so, when Satan starts to inspire you, you listen. You receive. You're receptive to his temptations. And this eventually leads to the greater sins. This is, in short, what the Quran was saying about someone whose heart becomes hard. All of this we said so that we go back to the hadith. The hadith in which the Holy Prophet was saying to Imam Ali alayhi salam, if you do not attend the gatherings of scholarship, if the believer does not attend the gatherings of scholarship, of knowledge, for more than 40 days, the heart becomes hard, and then you will become more daring to commit the greater sins. And then the Holy Prophet ended by saying, لِأَنَّ الْعِلْمَ حَيَاةُ الْقَلْبِ, because knowledge is the life of the heart. And, so that's one. And two, and there is no worship without knowledge. And three, and there is no knowledge without, or knowledge is useless without action. So now we have the full cycle. And those we've talked about at length in the past. So this hadith, inshallah, now is clear and it makes sense. Everything that the Holy Prophet is saying is basically, the Quran talked about a cycle that leads to the heart becoming hard, and then you are open to the temptations of the devil, evil. You are opening yourself up to evil as your heart hardens. And of course you're going to keep doing more and more because you become desensitized. The small sin means absolutely nothing. So you move on to the bigger sin, which initially means something. And with time it means nothing. So you move to an even bigger sin. You become desensitized. And so the Holy Prophet, what he's telling Imam Ali alayhi salam is, don't let this last for 40 days. That's a very long time. How do you break this cycle? Put yourself in a situation where you receive a reminder of true knowledge. And make sure this is fewer than 40 days apart. 40 days is a very long time to keep sinking into this. So catch it before and break the cycle. How do you break the cycle? Put yourself in a situation where you are exposed to knowledge. Which knowledge? The verses are clear. The Holy Prophet is clear. Knowledge that affects your heart. It does something to your heart. It makes you want to be better. It makes you want to stop the sin. It reminds you of your covenant with God. Right? This is what we take from these verses. There's a lot more that we can say around this, but in short, I think this covers and links back to the same discussions we've had. The importance of the gatherings, making sure that gatherings are gatherings of knowledge. And here we have very clearly the type of knowledge that we're looking for is not just a data dump of, history or theology or just info. That's not what we're looking for. The knowledge has to somehow connect back to softening the heart. It has to affect you spiritually. It has to make you want to stop committing sins. It has to make you want to be a better person. And that's why the Holy Prophet, in fact, was saying earlier that it is a revival of the heart. That's, in short, the revival of the heart. That this is the life of the heart. The next hadith, this was a longer hadith that we went through earlier in the series. I'm not going to go through the hadith. I'm just going to read the one line that is relevant to us without any commentary from Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam in Dua al-Sahar. Late night or very early morning, pre-dawn. His invocation or his supplication for pre-dawn. Or reciting after Salat al-Layl, for instance. Or reciting in Shahr Ramadan. This is when we read Dua al-Sahar. And so there is a line in there. It's a beautiful dua. We read passages of it in the past. This is just a quick reminder in which the Imam starts to, when he's talking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's talking to his Lord, he asks these questions. Why am I in this case? Why have I become a sinner? Why do I have all these shortcomings towards my duties towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And in one of the lines the Imam says, أَوْ لَعَلَّكَ فَقَدْتَنِي مِنْ مَجَالِسِ الْعُلَمَاءِ فَخَذَلْتَنِي. Or perhaps you have seen me absent from the gatherings of the scholars or the gatherings of scholarship, so you have forsaken me. You've left me to myself. Right? فَخَذَلْتَنِي. Khudlan simply means that you're let go to your own devices. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just leaves you be. He doesn't do anything bad or anything good to you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as though, Imam al-Sajjad is saying, as though you can put yourself in a situation where you can remember God. So the Imam is telling Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's asking God, which of course does not apply to the Imam. He's teaching us. He's saying there are places and there are times and there are ways in which when you know, if you place yourself in those situations, you are going to remember God. You are intentionally staying away from those places. So what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do in return? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, you're not interested in Him. He lets you be. You are now up to your own devices. There's no more spirituality that comes your way. There's no more blessing that will come your way. That's it. This is the life you want. This is the life you're choosing. Fine, go that way. But the Imam says this is a calamity. This is a disaster. To be left to my own devices this way. This is khudlan. So the Imam says, أو لعلك فقدتني من مجالس العلماء فخذلتني. So perhaps you have found me absent from the gatherings of scholarships or scholars, so you have forsaken me. Now, the last point I want to make regarding the gatherings, so that inshallah next time when we meet, we move to the next heading in this topic of the community of knowledge. We're talking about now the benefits of these gatherings. Some of them are very clear. Some of them we touched on. Some of them we didn't touch, but inshallah they are clear. For instance, when we gather together around knowledge, first of all, and inshallah you will remember the verses that we recited earlier. For instance, in Surah Al-Asr, we said that there are ways that we have to be religious that we cannot meet unless we are as part of a group. When the Quran says, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ, you cannot do that with yourself by your own. You have to have other people who ask you and encourage you and urge you to have patience and to be good. And there has to be people that you do that too. Which means that it's impossible. There are aspects of the religion that are impossible to meet individually. You have to do this as part of a group. Okay? So this encouragement and urging, and we went through the verses of the Quran that establish this. This is just a reminder. This insistence. Why is there so much insistence on gathering? Getting together around knowledge. So first, urging and encouraging each other. That's one. And as a reminder, we covered that. 2, competition. You might think that you're good. How about you meet a group of believers like you? See how good you really are. You think you pray, you think you read Quran, you think you read supplications, you think you know. Then you meet others. Maybe you want to compete. This is human nature. There are things you're not supposed to compete about. You see someone, they have more money, a nicer car, bigger house, no problem. No competition there. But for religion, for spirituality, compete. You should compete. Don't let anyone be better than you. Why are they better than you? And in fact, the Quran says, if there is anything worthy of competition, it's heaven. Compete for heaven. If there's anyone who wants to compete for anything, let them compete for paradise. Nothing else. There is competition. This is noble competition, honorable competition. وَفِي ذَلِكَ فَلْيَتَنَافَسَ الْمُتَنَافِسُونَ. If there are people who want to compete, let them compete for paradise. Well, who are you going to compete alone in your home? Watching TV, that's enough for you to feel competition? No, gather. Get together with other believers. Discuss things. And work on yourself. And become better. That's noble competition. And your competition, you competing with them will urge them and encourage them to be better too. This is good for everyone. And if you're not interested in competing, that's your loss. You don't have to compete. We spent a lot of time past few gatherings informally discussing heaven and all the ranks of heaven. And we were saying, it's like you can see it as a hotel. Some people might accept a 1-star hotel, or a 2-star hotel, or a 3, or a 5, or a 10, or a 50, or 1,000. In our ahadith, they say the ranks of heaven are the same number as the verses of the Quran. So let's say it's around 6,700 ranks, just to keep it simple. 6,700 stars. And you will know, everybody knows, when you are in heaven, it's an amazing, incredible honor to be in that rank of 1. That is an incredible honor. But no way that you can compete with the person who is in rank 5. And everybody knows that this is a person in rank 5, and this is a person in rank 1. And this is a person in rank 50, and 200, and 4,000. Why? Why do they get the 4,000 and I get 1? I just had to work a little bit harder. Put in a little bit more. This is the whole point here. We are here to get those ranks, to get those stars. Why do I accept that others have a better rank than me? And it's not like it's hidden. And I've given this example before. To me, this is an incredible example to see the ranks of paradise. We have narrations that say Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam appears to some people in heaven, in paradise. He will appear to them once a year. And to some people once a month. And to some people once a week. And some people can see him every day. And there are people who are with Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Everybody knows. It's not hidden. Where do you want to be? Of course there are great honors. Of course whatever you wish is there in all the ranks. But you can't compete. These are very different categories. Not everything is just about material goods. The material goods are there. The human being is a lot more than just this body. Everybody will have the things related to the material good. What about the psychological? What about the spiritual? Which are infinite in the human being. You can keep going as high as you want in those dimensions. Don't limit yourself to the physical and the bodily. There's a lot more. When the Quran says, they will have everything they want and the pleasure of God. This is something completely different. And we may not know what it means in this world. We'll feel it, we'll experience it in the afterlife. But this is not everyone. This is one group. Only that group will have and the pleasure of God. No one else gets that. Okay, so this is the noble, honorable competition. Gather together. This took us completely on a tangent. Learning. One of the benefits is to learn from each other. I learn from you and you learn from me. It could be completely unexpected. But I have to gather first. We have to see each other first. Who knows what I will learn from you or what you may learn from me. Next, the reminders. The Quran says that reminders are very important. It's not that you don't know. You know. You know it better than I do. But reminders are good. And the Quran says those who benefit from the reminders, they're the true believers. Other people don't benefit from the reminder. سَيَذَّكَّرُ مَنْ يَخْشَى. The one who fears God will be reminded. The others don't benefit. You can remind them, they say, we heard this, we already know this. Why do you keep repeating the same thing? Whereas the person who is trying to learn, whose heart is open, when you remind them, they benefit from that reminder. They will see something new in it. It will still have an effect on them. And our religion is built on reminders. There's a reason why you keep repeating the same prayer, day in and day out, 5 times a day. You've prayed it once, that should be enough. 5 times, fine, 5 times. Every day? Every day. Every year I have to redo the same fast? I've done it. I've experienced the fast. That's enough. No, every year. That reminder is going to bring you back to life. You need it. It recharges you. And there's a social dimension. When you see others and they see you, you remind them and they remind you, you go back recharged. You want this, and you want this in person. Next, the secondary benefits, which is you meet people and they meet you. You might help them, they might help you. It might be spiritual. They might help you religiously and you help them religiously. It might not have anything to do with religiously. I have a business, I need someone, I need an electrician, I meet an electrician, great. I have a job for you and it's a win-win, we both benefit. Beautiful. That's how you build a community. And those are mentioned in the narrations. Very important. And then there's a spirituality around these gatherings. When you gather and you gather in person around true knowledge, it has its own spirituality. And you leave those gatherings uplifted. You get nourishment that you can't get anywhere else. Your soul gets nourished. It's food for the soul. You can't find that anywhere else. The type of energy that you can't get through a screen. You can't get from the phone. You can't get from a book. You can only get in person. And we should all know this. Anyone who has gone to perform a ziyarah, anyone who has gone, or inshallah you will all go to perform ziyarah, to go to Mecca, there's a spirituality and an energy that you find in that place you don't find anywhere else. You have to attend in person. In the nights of Muharram, in the nights of Shahr Ramadan, when people are praying together, invoking together, supplicating God together, it has a different energy. It's the same prayer you're performing at home and in the mosque. Same prayer. But it has a completely different energy when 50 or 100 or 200 people are performing it together. The last point, and I wanted to finish with this, and this is the only reason why I'm making this entire introduction to wrap up the topic, but this was the only reason why, and it took me a while to find this specific hadith, out of embarrassment. Unfortunately, a lot of people, when we talk about religion, everybody is interested in the upper limit of spirituality. They want to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only because He is worthy of being worshipped. I don't want to worship God because I'm interested in heaven. I don't want to worship God because I'm afraid of hell. I want to worship Him because He is worthy of being worshipped. Noble, beautiful as a thought. But the truth is, this is delusional. For the majority of us, this is not realistic. It's a noble thought to aspire to move towards. Yes. But our religion says there's a lot of steps. You have to work on yourself. Someone who is at the level of, let's say, kindergarten, and they hear about something and they say, I don't agree with that. And I have my own theory, my own idea about this. And I want to tell the person who came up with this that they're wrong. They still have a long way to go before they compete with this person who has a PhD in the field. And they're at the kindergarten level. It's not that it's impossible. If you put in the work and you work on yourself and you improve your knowledge and you get there, yes, you will be able to show them why they are right or they are wrong, and you will be entitled to your opinion just like they are entitled to theirs. No problem. Otherwise, you don't have the tools. You didn't prepare the ground for this. For the majority of us, we have issues praying our prayers. Just the 5 prayers every day, we don't pray them. Or if we pray them, we don't pray them on time. We lose our mind. We get too angry. We haven't dedicated a certain amount of our wealth to the poor. These are the basics of our religion, correct? We all agree on this. And we all struggle with these things. These are the basics. This is the ABC. This is before I worship God because He's worthy of worship. I'm not there. Heaven and hell are not enough to move me right now. I'm still indifferent and I'm still hesitating. Do I pray? Okay, I'll pray maybe in 10 minutes, in 30 minutes. Okay, it's almost sunset now. Maybe we're at that level. So the reason I say this is because sometimes, in fact, in a lot of times, our religion gives us hacks. It gives us an easy way out. But we have to take it. It's there for a reason, so that we work on ourselves and use everything that our religion has made easier for us, seize it, make full advantage of it. One perfect example of this, we could spend a long time on this. A perfect example of this is this topic. Why should we get into gatherings? Because out of embarrassment, you will not commit a sin. The person who is beyond this, they don't need this, fine. Good for them. They will not commit the sin, they will not even think about a sin. Beautiful. For the rest of us, we need this. We need everything we have. Religion says there are easier things, take them. We all know that if you are extremely sincere in the way you worship, that's a much higher quality worship. If you are not committing the sin because you truly fear God, beautiful. That's exactly what we want. But there are also situations where you would commit the sin. You could even be thinking of committing the sin, but you will not because there are people around. And going to the sin is, of course, the extreme. Before the sin, you could be not committing a sin, but you could be better. Why would you be better? Out of embarrassment, out of shame. You see people and you are ashamed to act in a certain way in front of them. It's not becoming of you. You're worth more than that. You should behave in a better way. The way you talk, the way you conduct yourself. It could be the small things, the small decision, and it could be your whole life in general. If you are around those types of people, then your life should be in a certain way. So this encourages you. Maybe the reason is not pure sincerity and love of God. Maybe. Maybe the reason is simply because you're ashamed around those people to be at that level. You need to be better. Our religion says, beautiful, and you get your reward for it. Good enough. Of course. Why not? Of course I want this. That's the easy way out. I'll work on my spirituality, and when I get better, I'll get more reward because it will be sincerely for God. For now, I'm doing it out of shame. I'm embarrassed. But it counts. This is a hack. I should take full advantage of it. So, allow me now to, with that long introduction, now we read the hadith and we end for today. عن أبي الجارود عن الأصبغ بن نباتة عن أمير المؤمنين عليه السلام قال كان يقول. So this is one of the companions of Imam Ali alayhi salam. He says Imam Ali used to say, which tells us that he used to repeat this repeatedly. من اختلف إلى المساجد أصاب إحدى الثمان. So the one who regularly attends mosques will acquire at least one of these 8 benefits. أخا مستفادا في الله. A brother who is useful or beneficial in God. So a brother in faith, a sister in faith, who brings you benefit or to whom you bring a benefit. The benefit might be spiritual and the benefit might be worldly. Someone who helps you or that you help. That's a huge advantage. Why not? That's enough. Imam alayhi salam says there's 8. That's 1. أو علما مستظرفا أو مستطرقا. Or a knowledge that comes your way. It could be fresh knowledge or unexpected knowledge, depending on how you translate it. A knowledge that comes your way. That's a second benefit. Sometimes all of these benefits combine together, by the way. Each one of them by itself, on its own, is fully worthy of it too. Knowledge that you may gain. And it could be unexpected knowledge. أو آية محكمة. You learn a verse of the Quran. Muhkama means that it's clear, manifest, clear. Maybe you didn't know the verse at all, you learned a new verse. You knew the verse, you learned its explanation. You knew an explanation, you learned a new perspective around it, more depth to it. Beautiful. One more verse of the Quran. What else? أو رحمة منتظرة. Or an expected mercy. This is when we said there are spiritual benefits. You got together as a group and you supplicated and you prayed together. I expect mercy. I expect a new blessing in my life for this. Why not? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, you get together and you worship me in this way, additional mercy for you, additional blessings for you. أو كلمة ترده عن ردى. A word that prevents him from destruction. Here, spiritual destruction. A word that you might hear, it could be a little idea, it could be a couple of words, a sentence, something that touches you. That's what you needed to hear. And then you decide not to move in one way, you'll move in another way. That way was leading to your destruction. Your life was going in a certain way, now it will move in another way. Huge benefit. Another one. أو يسمع كلمة تدله على هدى. Or he might hear a word that guides him towards guidance, that brings him towards guidance. أو يترك ذنبا خشية أو حياء. Or to stop performing a sin, to forego a sin, to abstain from a sin out of fear or shame. Muhammad alayhi salam says that's a huge benefit. Take it. I'll stop here. There's a lot more we can say, but I think we covered enough for today, inshallah. So inshallah, next time we meet, we continue with a new heading related to the community of knowledge. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين.